Reclaim ground media, we're taking back the sound, lifting up the truth until the walls come down. Voices for the kingdom, hope in every town. This is where the lost get found. On reclaim ground.
Hey everyone, welcome to Reclaim Ground. Tonight we are going to be talking about our schools and the environment and what is going on in our public schools here in Delaware. Katie, if you want to talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about tonight, and then I'll open it up.
We're so happy to have you guys on our second episode of Reclaim Ground Media. And the topic tonight is going to be about violence in the schools. And we're going to go beyond the headlines. We're going to go into the hallways, the classrooms, the counselor rooms, and into the homes of people that are actually affected by this crisis.
So, Katie, when I was preparing for this, this has been an incredible week getting to meet so many people that are on the front lines of our schools and people reaching out to us, some that feel very comfortable with talking with us, some that are afraid of retaliation of what they may say as well. And it's been very interesting. And I had a whole thing prepared, but right before we met, I wanted to share with all of you. My duty here at home is dishwasher. So after the meal, I wash the dishes, and I was listening to a song by the Belonging Company. And the part of the song, it's called The Mighty Name of Jesus. And a part of the song goes, I draw a permanent boundary line. The enemy has no right to come near my family.
I love that song, Brian. It's one of my favorite.
And that just kind of stuck with me about what we're talking about tonight. And what we're talking about tonight is the violence that's going on in our schools. And how do we draw a permanent boundary line to say, this is not okay? And where do we bring these professionals in that deal with this on a daily basis and say, what direction are we headed? And also, what do you see from being in these professional settings as the positive ways that we can move forward, and how can we help kids and families on the ground level?
Absolutely. It's so important to get to the root cause of what the issue is and treat the root cause, or else it's never going to stop. And what we hear day in and day out are families that are sick of the way the system is currently and want a change. They're afraid to send their kids to school every day, even if they're a student that genuinely just goes to learn. They're finding themselves caught in the crosshairs of school violence one way or the other. And another thing that I was not expecting so heavily when we announced the topic of tonight was the amount of teachers that would reach out and say, hey, I have a lot to add on this topic, but I unfortunately can't be a guest on the show because I'm so afraid of retaliation from speaking out about this. And it shouldn't be that way. These teachers and the staff, even the administration at the school, should have a safe place to go to work. And if things are not feeling that way, or if there's a problem in that workspace, they should have the opportunity to voice that without feeling retaliation from doing that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So, Katie, can you bring us, before we jump into our guests, and we've got some amazing guests tonight, can you bring us up to date with some of the data that you found on the national level, but also in Delaware as well?
Yeah, absolutely. If we can bring that up real quick. When we were preparing for this episode, we really wanted to make sure to get the facts absolutely correct so it could really drive home what the problems were. And some of the statistics that I found when we were looking into this story was more than 67% of public schools reported at least one violent incident in the 2021 to 2022 school year. The rate of students exposed to school shootings has nearly tripled from 19 per 100,000 students in the 99 to 2004 era to 51 per 100,000 students up to 2024, from 2020 to 2024. A recent study actually found that the number of school shooting incidents annually increased from about 20 in 1970 to over 250 in 2021, which when you crunch those numbers, it's more than a 10-fold rise. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, during the 2019 to 2020 school year, 15% of public schools reported bullying among students at least once a week. These children are having to go to school, and even on their way to school, they have fear that this is about to happen. 15% of public schools reported bullying among students at least once a week. 16% reported cyberbullying at least once a week. So not only are these children being subjected to this while in the halls, while in the classrooms, they get no reprieve when they go home onto the home front either. From the school pulse panel, about 30% of public schools reported that cyberbullying happened at least once a week or more frequently. And regarding classroom disruptions, 22% of schools said that students being disrupted in the classroom, which would be calling out, talking with others during instruction, leaving seats when not allowed, they had severe negative impact on their learning. When you take a deeper look into these statistics, the Rand Corporation and other research show that 20% of school fights occurred about once a month, and weapons were confiscated in about 45% of these instances. The statistics on bullying, unfortunately, that does not get any better. From 2021 to 2022, roughly 19.2% of students aged 12 to 18, which would be, I believe, grades 6 to 12, reported being bullied in the US. And the classroom was the most common location for bullying. 39% of bullied students said the classroom was where this was happening.
So thank you, Katie. Do you want to bring this a little bit back home to Delaware as well? Those were some great statistics, but I know you have statistics for some schools here at home, and then we'll bring up our first guest.
Yeah, I do. And this information also, guys, if you want to look it up independently on your own as well, you can go to the school report cards. You can go to the data sets provided by our government. That's all publicly available information to pull any statistic from any school in the state of Delaware. I just tried to get a little bit of a broad view on these statistics. So when I was looking at state data, one Delaware high school, which we're going to keep anonymous for the sake of this conversation, reported 195 police level incidents of violence this school year alone. And across Delaware, another major high school reported 145 violent incidents this year. Another recorded 150, and others with a little bit smaller of a population in the schools show about 40 to 50 serious incidents, even in smaller student populations.
So thank you, Katie. There's definitely been an increase, and we've heard parents from across the state and kids from across the state reach out. There are Facebook and social media pages about, fights that are going on. And that's why we wanted to go ahead, Katie. You look like you want to say
I'm sorry, that absolutely blew my mind. So a bunch of parents independently, separately from different schools explained to me that this is more than just disagreements between students, that there are student-led accounts, specifically on Instagram, where the students record these fights. They share amongst the different schools, so they can cover all different schools in this, and they post them. And so the question kind of led to their children were saying that a lot of these fights are breaking out, not really because there's such an issue that these children aren't emotionally regulated enough to handle, but it's specifically for posting on these accounts. And I went to some of these accounts. Now, some of them were banned by the time I got to them. It does look like Instagram is doing a fairly good job of taking these down as soon as they get a hold of them or as soon as they're reported. But there were some that were still active with a ton of videos on them.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to bring on our first guest, Joey Melvin. He has been, before I give a quick intro, the reason why I believe he has been so successful is because he's always looked at how can I create a positive environment in the schools of what's going on between the community and within the school itself. And I have seen him do that inside of schools here in Delaware. And he has really brought schools that have had problems with violence and discipline and been able to work the SRO system in order to benefit these kids and benefit their lives. So Joey Melvin, he serves as the executive director of the Delaware Comprehensive School Safety Program. He is leading statewide efforts to enhance school safety throughout comprehensive planning, training, and resource development. He's got a career that spans over 2 decades in law enforcement and school safety, and he brings experience in crisis response, behavioral threat assessment, school-based policing, and emergency operations. I personally know him from his work as being an SRO in Georgetown and also in the Milford school districts. And when I wanted to know something about what was going on in the environment in schools, I went to Joey because he always reminded me of somebody who said, hey, we got to get to the kids. We've got to work with the kids, and they are the ones that are that can make this positive impact. So welcome, Joey. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, sure. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So tell us, in your opinion, what do you see, working as a school resource officer and working as for the state, working amongst these different school districts, where do you see the state of the environment of these schools? Where do you see the good and maybe not so good, and where do you see that we can improve on these things?
Yeah, I think first it's really important just to note that this is fluid, right? So our climates in our schools, it can be very subjective based on where you're at and your personal experiences, right? So when you talk to people, and I talk to a lot, right? So in my role as a school resource officer in 2 different agencies, working in schools from elementary to middle to high to dedicated special needs, perspective changes, right? You can talk to some, and I think that's just really important to note as we discuss these things, because you can't, you can't take a cookie cutter approach to dealing with this. But to kind of answer your question, I think it's a mix of a lot of strengths, but at the same time, a lot of challenges. And these schools are microcosms of their communities. Mm-hmm. And being that, we have, external factors that impact the things that we see and experience. And we also have the internal struggles as well. So, not to give you a kind of blatant answer, but it really can't. These things ebb and flow. I've been in it long enough to see it firsthand, see different things impact the schools, right? You figure when I first started, social media just started. So I can literally talk about how that has impacted the culture and the climate of our buildings. When I first started, it was not long, probably about 5-6 years, when vapes showed up. Well, if you talk to any kind of school and see specifically what that did to the environment, it's really interesting. So again, not to give you a kind of a singular answer, but it's complex. But there are a lot of strengths in our schools as well.
Yeah. Tell us about, I think we've had a conversation about this before, and I find it very interesting. Tell us about the nature of bullying and what kids go through before the advent of social media, and now with social media, the difference that maybe even their parents don't know about, because the climate and the things going on with social media are so much different than maybe we had to go through when we were in school.
Yeah. So you think about what we had to deal with. We would have an incident at school, and it could be singular, it could be ongoing harassment. But for the most part, at the end of the day, you got home and you were separated from it. So you had some points in time where you didn't have to deal with it. Our students today, it's 24/7. It doesn't stop, right? So, and that with the advent of social media, cell phones, and what we see when we study what their experiences are, the victims actually seek out this stuff, and they seek it out because, just like anybody else, a lot of people I want to know who's talking about me, right? So while you would think it'd be easy to say, just turn off your phone, just suspecting that people are discussing you, talking about you, making fun of you, they actually are kind of seeking it out and end up being re-victimized. So that's been a tremendous paradigm shift in the world of bullying. Just the cyber perspective of it is really compounded it. And I think certainly that, coupled with, our rise and increase in mental health resource needs in the community, in the school, they definitely parallel each other.
Yeah. How do you personally, and how do you teach other individuals in the schools to educate children and maybe even their parents about the dangers of social media and kind of this newer age bullying or that could lead to violence inside the schools?
Yeah, the one thing that I say I think it's really kind of positive about that we see in our schools is taking integrated approaches. And I think, in defense of schools too, you need to look back at, what a school supplied 30, 40 years ago to a family is so different today. Like if you can think back, and I'm not calling my or your age out, but when you think back about resources that were available when we were in middle school, and you look at what's available today from a resource, a lot of schools have had, kind of been forced to become resource centers to support the community because they are their kids, understandably. But with that, what we see is, increased roles with mental health, that integration, those, multi-tiered systems of support, so we have people, and I think that's a big part of it too, that connectivity between and within the school. I know my role as a school resource officer and the other SROs, I'll speak for them. We do so many things within the building, but we don't just work with the administrator. We're working with the administrator. We're working with a counselor. We may be talking to the food service staff, right? So it's this network that has really grown, and it's really been a positive thing because, in the past, maybe people weren't promoted to be, bystanders and witnesses and report things. And now it's a community. And, while I appreciate, there's concerns for the schools, I really think it's important that we acknowledge that these things have occurred. And I know, data is really important, and I know Katie mentioned it, but, a couple things I try to make sure people remember. I think the lens has gotten bigger. So it seems like there may be some more transparency of things going on, but, statistically, like juvenile arrests, for instance, in the past 20 years have dropped almost 50%. That's crazy to think about, but our arrest rates for juveniles has done nothing to go down. On a local level, we're seeing very similarly, and again, it's hard to perceive when you think about people's perspectives, but school crime data, which is more your assaults and your weapons, just between the 23 and 25 school year, it dropped by 250 incidents, right? Like that's a lot of incidents of more of your kind of felony crimes that we saw lower. But I think what that goes to is there's a couple things. One, there's a lot more reporting. Like part of our mission at the Delaware School Safety Center is, one of the things that we do is provide all schools in the state with a reporting, anonymous reporting platform. So we will give this to the districts, and it provides another tool to encourage reporting. And we know if there's a method for a student or sometimes even a parent to report something they're concerned about anonymously, we're going to get increased reports. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing too with some of that data, right? We're going to see an increase in reports of bullying. I think perception of whether that's negative or not depends on how you view it, right? Like, because we're asking, now that we've provided them a tool to do it, we're going to get more reports, but it allows for more intervention. So it's kind of it's interesting to follow, and I think it's important to see both perspectives and sides of it.
So, Joey, you were talking about sorry, Katie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question on that real quick. So when just for me to understand too, when we're looking at that data, does that data come from what is being reported from students and families, or does that come from after what is reported from students and families, what then the administration and the schools go on to report?
Right. So I guess it depends on what data point you're referencing, but the school, the local data I was referencing actually comes from the Department of Education, and that's public data, part of their school discipline plan report, right? So they have that broken down to each year, and you can go in and see like school crimes, and again, those are the ones. And then they have even the discipline records. So that discipline would be something that didn't reach a school crime, but that dropped by 5,000 incidents. And 23, 25. So again, and there could be some different things that could impact that, but that's what that data comes from, that when they actually code it within Department of Education in that.
So after incidents are escalated from the families to the schools and then escalated from the schools to the Department of Education, that is that final number that we're finding on the website.
Right. That's the numbers from the public schools that once it's coded, whether, it could have occurred in school or it could have been reported outside of school. But either way, if it ends up being a school incident and they code it as a crime or discipline, whatever that be, that's the final number that goes in that.
Okay.
Yep.
So,
and I can speak. Again, just to speak on numbers, I think it's important, like data. So I look at, we have the Juvenile Civil Citation Program in Delaware, a tremendous program. I was very happy to be a part of its inception. SROs are one of our biggest advocates for it, and it's a way to keep kids from being part of a criminal justice system, right? But one of the things that we do is intervene. So that's going to help with that decline in juvenile arrests, right? We're issuing a citation. It's civil, and if they successfully complete the program, that's going to drive the numbers down. I think I spent a lot of time digging into data because I think it's important, but it's also understanding that data is as important, right? Really analyzing, like, what are they saying? Because sometimes that the perception could be misconstrued, and I need to educate myself on that. And I encourage the parents and everyone to do the same thing, really understand what you're reading and what you're hearing.
So Joey, one piece that I find very fascinating about SROs is their impact on the community as well. And we had something recently in Milford where there was a kid who was part of a carjacking over a weekend period. And then the police department in Milford orchestrated with the SRO because he was, I believe, 17 years old, and said, "Hey, do you know who this kid is? Because he may be in your school." And he said, "Oh yeah, he's going to show up for school today." Mm-hmm. And they were able to, before he was able to get out of his car, they were able to arrest him, and they found pistols in his car, ammunition in his car. And can you tell us about how SROs work with the law enforcement of that community, and they are able to communicate with each other and sometimes prevent things from happening, not only in the schools, but also in the community as well?
Yeah. So, when we look at the SRO program and when I teach SROs across this country, one of the biggest things is, one, making sure that they're carefully selected, right? Not mm-hmm. every cop should work in the school, just like, every cop should be on the narcotics undercover team or whatever, it's a specialty. But also they're getting properly trained about what that role is. And interesting about that role, like a lot of people don't understand the history. Like the first police department to do this was in Flint, Michigan in 1950s, right? So there's a deep, deep history back then. And that wasn't for any other purpose. That chief said, I just want to make sure that we're a part of this community, and I understand that school is a part of the community. And I think that's important. So when we look at schools, taking your officer, putting him in the hallways, and now you're done right, you're positively branding your department, right? You're building that trust. And I saw this in the towns that I worked. It was a great feeling to be able to be in that school, build the relationships. And I would see it in the summer if I had to, cover a shift and I'm out on the street. It was interesting because those kids in those communities would run up to the SRO, but they wouldn't be doing that for every officer. It was just interesting because you had that. But at the same time, you build that trust so that when you're not there and it's 2:00 in the morning, there's been a traumatic incident, that officer that shows up wearing the same patch and uniform you are is going to help break down those barriers. Mm-hmm. Also within the school, kind of going back to what you were saying, building those relationships from a preventative standpoint. SROs, they're not there to just serve as, executive protection and walk around outside the building. The most important thing they do is build relationships with the people that are in that building. Some of my most positive relationships were born out of students that, had a lot of trauma. and we broke that down. And even it could have been their parents that didn't have a positive relationship with police, but I was able to build that relationship, and it just kept going and going. So if there was information about school safety, many times the students would come down to my office, report it to me directly. And whether that was in the community, something that they saw, or something they thought that was going to happen in the school, building that trusted relationship with that entire population is a really important part. And on top of that, I'll just say it's not just that; it's also, it's in the name, resource, being a resource to the school. So talking to the staff, helping them feel like you're a trusted part of that school as well. Whether it's administration, the emergency management portion, it's really comprehensive. But it again, that SRO is just a part of that integration of those different supports for those students.
Well, thank you, Joey. Katie, do you have any other questions for Officer Melvin?
I do. I have one other question that comes to mind. I cannot remember the school that it was occurring in, but I believe it was last week. And students that had come to the school early had been gathered in the gymnasium awaiting to go through metal detectors to enter the school. And during that period of time, one of the students actually pulled a knife on another student. Thankfully, another Good Samaritan student intervened and no harm came to the student that was on the victim's side of that. However, from your standpoint, does it make sense to have students gather in an area while they wait to go through metal detectors, or should that be done before they ever enter into the school building at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think something to think about is there's 2 points at every day that you're going to gather the students, right? And there's really no way to do that without kind of doing it in a mass, right? Because you've got to think about our schools, some of our lower population schools, you're thinking about 500 students. And when you're trying to logistically get them in and out of the building, it's not something you're going to be able to easily do, whether you're implementing different safety precautions or not. You're going to have large groups coming in your building 2 times a day, or going and leaving 2 times a day. And there's really, logistically, there's really no other ways to do that. There's things that can be looked at, and I'm not going to speak for any other school. Yeah. And I think when we meet with schools specifically and we look at, we do a lot of physical safety assessments of schools up and down the state, so those are things that we look at. We look at arrival, we stay there all day. We look at wayfinding, how the students move inside the building, and we look at dismissal, and we apply safety practices to all that. But at the same time, we have to keep it practical, right? Yeah. And I see this a lot with a lot of things in the, let's just say, the school safety industry right now. And I think we need to make sure that we stay practical. And, those incidents certainly cause a lot of attention to it, but we have to look at, how often those incidents are occurring. And that needs to be applied to that specific building area. Again, couldn't make a cookie cutter decision for that.
I think just hearing that, though, on the parent side, hearing that you guys are going through those lengths to evaluate the schools and all these little factors will make parents feel a little bit more comfortable that everything that is meaningful and realistically can be implicated, you guys are looking out for and doing. Thank you so much for answering that question, Joey.
Yeah. Yep. As we work with our schools, and like I said, we have tremendous relationships with all schools throughout the state, public and private. And, I can tell you firsthand that the discussions that we have is deeply caring individuals that want to do the best for our kids. And, again, I just would repeat that, we deal with kind of a fluid environment. We learn sometimes some of these best practices we're playing catch up with. And that's nobody's fault. That's just kind of the way it goes. We see the same thing again in our communities, right? As we see rising crime for different things, we think about how to combat that, and we have to do that. And I think taking that comprehensive approach is really our best way to do that.
Joey, I want you to know that in the comments right now, a lot of people are giving thanks for our SROs and saying that our SROs are amazing and you guys make such a difference. So I want you to walk away from this conversation knowing that you are very appreciated. And I think that I after reading these comments while you're speaking, a lot of people are very thankful that you came on tonight to give your perspective. So I thank you for that too.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Joey.
Sure.
And you're free to go. But thank you so much. Thank you for all the service you and the SROs. You have our backs at our schools, and we appreciate you going around our communities throughout the state and helping make sure that we are starting to secure in a practical way throughout our to help save our kids. So thank you so much. We're going to continue the conversation, but thank you, Joey.
Yes, thank you so much. That was actually very insightful. And it's nice being able to see the comments of people as they watch this, because that's an important thing for him to know. It has to be to some degree a little bit of a thankless industry when you're dealing with that day in and day out. But on the parent side, they are so thankful for SROs being in our building. And I do think they make such a difference. And that's why I was a huge advocate behind the bill that you introduced that would require SROs to be in every building. If we can bring in our next guest, that would be Rachel Herskowitz. I'm going to give a brief introduction so our audience knows who we're speaking with. Is Rachel with us now? Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
So now we're going inside the counseling office, the emotional crisis fueling school violence. Our second guest tonight is Rachel Herskowitz, the president of the Delaware School Counselor Association and a veteran educator who has dedicated more than 2 decades to Delaware students. Rachel spent 12 years in the classroom before transitioning into school counseling, where she is now in her 11th year serving the students at Mount Pleasant High School. In fact, Mount Pleasant has been her professional home for her entire counseling career. For the past 8 years, she has also served on the board of Delaware School Counselor Association, helping shape statewide support systems and advocacy for student mental health. And we're grateful to have her perspective here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Rachel.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. It was kind of last minute, but I'm glad I was able to jump on.
Your perspective is a very important one that we really wanted to make sure that we got somebody to cover, because we can have teachers in here giving their experiences from inside the classrooms and parents on the home front seeing what their kids come home and talk about. But you're in the nitty gritty of it all. You're listening day in and day out, and you have a perspective that could really shine a light on the why to this is happening.
I wish I actually knew the why.
Yeah.
Now, Rachel, I have to open up by telling you that my father was a guidance counselor in Seaford Middle and High School for 30 years. And I was telling Katie earlier that so he would meet with families and they would assume, they would say, well, you've got it easy because you're a guidance counselor, so your son must be perfect. He doesn't. So I don't know if you have children or not, but guessing by how you're laughing, you know how he answered that. He was like, I don't know. I don't know about all that. So, but thank you for all the work that you do in the schools. Thank you for your continued leaning into these kids, because they are our future. And they are where we need to continue to lean into. So, Katie, did you want to open it up?
Yeah, I just want to hear from Rachel. I want to see what she is seeing. I want to hear what she experiences day in and out, and try to find out if there's any root cause specifically to maybe some of these increases that we are seeing. What do you see, Rachel, from being inside of these schools every day?
I think I was listening to the SRO, who I have a great relationship with in my building, and they are instrumental. And I think the key thing that he said is building that community. Unfortunately, I also was listening when he was talking a lot about social media. And I think, to me, that's the root cause. We have an increased, fortunately, I'm not seeing high violence, which is great in schools, but I'm aware of violence my kids are in the community. And I'm seeing more of that being brought into the school than ever. I think a lot of smaller, like gang-related situations, which I wouldn't have seen 15 years ago, are kind of being brought in. So we have a great, we have a very good culture at the school I'm at, and no argument, nothing is ever over socioeconomic class. It's never over gender. It's never over race. It is never, ever over that. It is over something that stemmed on social media, or something that someone said, a post they made, someone taking someone's boyfriend or girlfriend, or something that went horribly wrong in the community. So there's I'm seeing a lot more of things going horribly wrong in the community in which these students are living. And I think that incident last week was at Laurel High School, which is as far south from Brandywine School District as you can get where I'm at. So it's all over. I mean, it runs the gamut. And I think from talking to friends at middle and elementary, I was blown away to know what elementary school kids are doing and things they're bringing into schools. And elementary kids are bringing in vapes every single day in all districts across the state. So I think it's getting parents to understand the severity. But unfortunately, a lot of times the parents are supporting their kids in these endeavors. And that's the part that I struggle with the most.
Yeah. So from a very uninformed, uneducated standpoint, when I'm hearing about a lot of these instances, because I have tons of nieces and nephews, and I'm so grateful that they give me the nitty gritty of what they're experiencing. But when they're telling me these stories, it seems like a lot of these instances of problems between students kind of stemmed from a self-perceived pride almost. Like their pride was hurt in something.
It is very true. And a lot of it is self-perceived. And I think as school counselors, we really try to educate our students on making good choices and all stemming from kindergarten and kindness and making good choices. And we are in the classrooms teaching lessons, and we're not guidance counselors anymore. We're school counselors, and we are actually, to say the word guidance counselor is it's a no anymore, because we are just not guiding small populations of students. We are school counselors. We're in and out of classrooms. We do groups. We look at the data to see what the needs of our school are, and we run groups to teach students the appropriate ways. We're doing what we can on our end. We love when we hear families follow up. And I will say one of the big things, and I think I see someone in the chat room, something, and the SRO brought up, the videoing of fights. It's real. I watched it. Unfortunately, we had a situation the other day, and the first thing they do, and whether we have students that are our highest end students, they were videoing as well. So it has become, and that's what I was upset about the fight, of course, but I was the most upset to watch the number of students take out their phones and record the fight. It was like a spectator sport, and it's terrible.
Absolutely. And that also relates back to what we were talking about earlier with social media being a large part of the issue. And especially something that stood out that you mentioned on were the younger grades, the elementary school grades having some of these problems. And one thing that came to mind when you were talking about that, and we're talking about the social media and really just screen time overall, it feels like kids of this generation are more emotionally dysregulated and don't really know how to handle when something doesn't go their way, or how to handle an adverse emotional response. That their immediate thing to hop to is violence or fighting with somebody or calling them out, however it is phrased. Do you think that there could be a correlation with what screen time, especially at a young age, does to a kid's brain, especially when we're talking about those dopamine receptors, and the way that they are capable or incapable of handling those conflicts?
Yes. I think the generation that I'm seeing wants instant gratification, and they want things done instantly. They want response instantly. They want reaction instantly. They want to see it in front of them. And I do attribute a lot of that to the amount of time they spend. And it's not just on the screen, it's the video games that they play as well.
Oh, yeah.
So, Rachel, I have a question for you. We're going to talk to teachers here tonight as well, or a teacher who has recently retired. But is it almost? Do you feel like your job is almost reteaching a value system that has been lost about, what things should these kids value? Because maybe the baseline that they come from is valuing the wrong things, in instant gratification. To some extent, money, whatever it may be. What do you see them coming in the door valuing, and what are you trying to teach them as far as more than just on your end reading and math, but what kind of social constructs are you having to teach them?
We have to teach them everything. Unfortunately, a lot of students are not coming in with knowing values. And unfortunately, a lot of them are coming in from seeing what they see within their communities. And a lot of time that's violence. A lot of the thing about Delaware, I mean, I grew up in New Jersey, and when I moved here, I thought, wow, like you can be in like such a wonderful area with just such high socioeconomic needs, and like a block over is just Section 8 housing. And it's a lot of our students are in, some are in it, and it's coming together. And some of them, they just don't know. And the parents are working, they're trying to put food on the table. A lot of them are from single family households. And I don't know that at birth, someone's reading books to them on making these choices and how to do these things. So we're teaching it. Fortunately, we do have a curriculum starting in kindergarten where they are taught these things. There's a mental health curriculum, there's a social emotional health curriculum. And I'm very fortunate that we are in Delaware where these have been put into law to have these in our schools. And they start teaching them in kindergarten, and we now have them in high school too. But to learn them at a young age is key. And yes, we are reteaching it. In our classroom lessons, we try to, even if we're in there talking about credits and graduation requirements and post-secondary education, we're still throwing in some of those basic lessons on just how to be a kind human and make good choices and not necessarily have to have that. And I think one of the big things is working with our kids on setting goals and where do they see themselves, and just having a purpose. And I think starting that at a young age and knowing that like they can be more than they see. And unfortunately, I have tons of students each year that's one parent's incarcerated, or one parent they've never knew. And it's just kind of working through like you can be more and you can do this, and just like setting those goals to see the big picture.
How do you encourage them to do that? How do you walk them through that process?
It's not easy.
I'm sure
it's not. Some of them just don't see that. They don't care for school. School is not something they like. A lot of them have received failing grades almost their whole life. So by the time they get to high school, it's like, why am I here? Oh, I'm here because I'm going to go to truancy court if I'm not, or my mom tells me I have to get up and go to school. Absenteeism, that is for a whole nother day. That's a huge issue nationwide. The amount of kids that are late to school every day is a huge issue. I know it's not just Delaware. I do a lot of research on that and look at different data. But just getting the kids to school and getting them to understand the value of that. I think we do a lot of goal setting within our classroom lessons, definitely in our small groups. So we'll look at data and we'll look at the kids, have the top tier referrals. We do have a tiered system, a tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 of MTSS support. So we'll look at our students that are in the highest need and look at what they need, group them together, and kind of base our lessons on that. And it typically always centers around some sort of goal setting built in to make them start to really see, like, I can do more.
Do you have any theories? Sorry, Katie.
No, you're good. Go ahead. You're good. I'll feed them up here.
do you have any theories of how, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but it feels like we've gone, maybe not the last generation, but maybe even 2 generations ago, where education was very highly valued, no matter what demographic you were, no matter what socioeconomic, and maybe even more if you were lower socioeconomic, because you understood that could be your way to climb out. And do you have any theories or of why maybe that has declined, of that being placed as a value in our society, or in certain people's minds?
I don't really know the why, and I ask myself that every day of when did we lose that. I think it's gone downhill a little bit since COVID. I think being able, and from kindergarten through 12th grade, them seeing that they can do school online has changed things a lot, because I will often get some of my most unmotivated students telling me that they want to go online and remote and virtual, and we don't have that option in our district unless it's a severe need. And I know there are some districts that do. So I think some of that was lost in COVID. I used to be like, I'm tired of using COVID as an excuse, and I'm tired of these kids, but using COVID as an excuse. But if I had to really dissect it, I do think since COVID, that has drastically changed because kids got to see that you can do it, and they don't value coming into the building as much, and they think like, oh, I can just go online. So that's like the main thing I can think of.
One of the things somebody brought up in our comments that I really wanted to touch on, their direct quote was, kids can't value education because education has no value. And that kind of brings me to something that I have been talking to a couple of state representatives about. I'm somebody that believes very much in universal school choice. So not choosing within the districts, not having the choice to maybe go out of your district to a specialty VOTEC school, but having all schools essentially operate like VOTEC schools. All schools have a specialty in a very specific specialty, whether it be graphic design or as a broader way, you would incorporate like audiovisual into that, kind of that side of things. One school is sciences, if kids really want to be nurses or doctors or the sciences behind it. I think putting a system in place, not using the same system, but putting a system in place that incentivizes and enthuses kids to be attending school. They want to get there on time. They want to learn. And not having these general education classes where kids are having to go into English and they're having to read about 18th century poets. Like, let's be honest, none of us want to do that, and it's not really important. The important part of those curriculums is the reading, and it is the developing the comprehension from that. So if you have specialty schools where the topic is all online with your niche and the profession you want to go into, and reading class, instead of learning about poets, you're reading material on your, I guess you would call specialty. Do you see any value in a system like that, which really kind of makes kids enthusiastic to go and learn again?
I do see some value to that. I do think, again, I think school choice is like a whole nother thing. I think it can help a school, but it can also significantly hurt a school. I think we have wonderful VOTECs in the state of Delaware, but they're different than some of the neighboring schools. Like when I was in high school, you went to VOTEC if you were not going to college. You went to VOTEC to learn your trade. Now our kids are going to VOTEC and they're going to four-year universities. We have a lot of different pathways in most of our comprehensive high schools in the state, but they're not everything that kids want, right? Like, so they're not, so I do think if they saw more value in, like, they'll say to me every day, why do I need algebra 2? I'm never doing something with this in my life. So I do think giving them something to see more value is helpful. It's just kind of like, it just seems like a big task that would be great if it could be done.
I think it at least deserves the research into something like that, if not that specifically, because like you said, kids are attending these VOTEC schools now and they're going on to four-year degrees. So if we make art schools, which I know there are art schools, but if we make these specialty schools that kids are just going to, and I mean, learning algebra and how to figure out those equations is important, but if you relate it back to that pathway or that specialty, it becomes less of a burdensome task and a boring task and more about, well, I'm interested in audio visual. So if I need to figure out the pixels or whatever, I don't know, that I need for this to do this, maybe it would trigger something different within them that would kind of make them interested in that curriculum again.
Yeah. I think the learning the why, getting them reinterested is huge.
Yeah. Another question I wanted to ask, which was brought up in the comments a little bit, is I'm probably going to upset some people when I say this. I'm a homeschool mom. We do homeschool co-op where we go in class. And over the years that we've been a part of something like this, I've never once witnessed any type of altercation even between students, not even a slight altercation in a school setting. So I'm wondering if having students that are being forced to interact with people they just don't get along with day in and day out and go and see them every day. And like you said, now they're not only doing it in schools, but now they have to go home and they're in the same friend circles and they're seeing them. Does that create extra tensions that could be alleviated in some type of a different system?
I think we try to teach students to be like, overall, like good citizens, global, how to get along with people they don't necessarily like. I have probably 13 conversations a day of like, you guys don't have to be best friends, but you're in the same class and you need to show respect. And so I don't necessarily get along with all my coworkers, but we're professional, and we try to teach, like, even though you might not like them, you don't have to hang out with them outside of school, but we need to respect each other. So I do think yes, but I do think as a school counselor, like, social integration is huge to me. And it's actually, research shows, like, for kids with severe anxiety, like, keeping them home is detrimental. So I'm a believer in kids being in school if they can. There are, and I know a lot of kids that do want to go, and they do go to homeschool. And as long as they have that social interaction, like, not just in a whole totally online, and they never interact with anybody else, that's their interaction, right? That's what works for them. But I do think it's important to teach kids how to interact with others. It doesn't always go so well, but we try.
Yeah, no, you guys are doing your best. You really are. I'm just trying to think. I think fixing a failing education system, which at the end of the day, despite all the best efforts, and whenever I get online and I talk about schools or things happening in schools or proficiency rates, it is never, in my opinion, and coming from me, as a reflection of the teachers, because I do have, as many teachers may get upset as soon as they, this topic of school gets brought into the picture. For just as every single teacher that may be getting upset about that, I have teachers in my inbox thanking me for talking about that and bringing a light to these situations. But the reality is our school systems are failing, and they're failing terribly. And not only are they failing terribly, but they're failing these kids, and then we're passing them on into the real world. If you look at some of the statistics from some school districts, not Brandywine School District, some other school districts, they're having proficiency rates in the 30s for reading, and even lower in the low 20s for math. And then if you look at the graduation rates, even if we're just looking at 12th grade and we're not considering any other grades as factors, there's an 89% graduation rate. What we're doing is we're not getting through to the student. We're not teaching them the value and the skills needed to be a productive member of society in the real world. But then we're just saying, thanks for being here. Good luck. And that's not working out, because there's a direct correlation between that and crime as adults.
For sure. And I say to students all the time, as a high school counselor, this is the first time that you can say school really counts, because you don't go anywhere if you don't earn the credits. And middle schools and elementary schools, if you look back, when I retain my students that don't pass in 9th grade, when you look back at their school records, and I look in the system to see how many times they've been retained, probably on average 4 times starting from kindergarten. So they've been socially promoted typically, because they don't hold them back as much. But when you get to high school, you're not promoted until you pass the class. You're not. And so it's a rude awakening for a lot of them when they get to high school.
No, I was told that specifically, I believe it's the Red Clay School District, they have a 50% policy where they're not allowed to grade students less than 50%, no matter what. So that seems horrible in my opinion, because if I understand the idea, you don't want to discourage the child, but at the end of the day, the job is to set the child up for the real world, where there's not going to be people there offering extra credit and stuff like that. So to have this 50% policy that no matter what, the child gets 50%, even if they're not in attendance, just seems counterproductive to the end goal of making productive members of society.
Yeah. True story.
I'm glad we can see eye to eye on that.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I was told that. And I believe they said, the person that reached out to me said the only curriculum this did not pertain to was driver's ed. So thank God for that.
Driver's ed. You have to pass the state exam. I think it's a 70 or 80, and you have to pass the actual driving part. So driver's ed is not a 50%.
All right. Well, thankful for that. Brian, do you have any more questions for Rachel? Rachel, you've been an amazing guest tonight.
Yeah,
You've answered and had some really great conversation that I think will really resonate with viewers.
Yeah, I have plenty more questions, but we got to get to our other guest, Rachel. I hope that we can connect over a cup of coffee.
Yeah,
or
feel
something.
free.
I have so many more questions for you.
Yeah,
but thank you so much. Thank you,
Rachel. That was a great conversation. I think that was really, really great conversation. And it makes perfect sense that coming up and following Rachel as a school counselor, we also have now a retired teacher to kind of give us her perspective from what she was experiencing inside of the classroom. So if we could bring up Deanna Bilecki, I want to give her a quick introduction so our viewers know who we are speaking with tonight. Hi, Deanna. Joining us tonight is Deanna Bilecki, a recently retired educator whose 27-year career in Delaware's public schools spans grade K through 5. Deanna holds certifications in elementary and early childhood education, as well as a master's degree in reading. Over the course of nearly 3 decades, she taught in the Red Clay and Christina School District and was featured as one of Delaware's top teachers in Delaware Today magazine in 2022. And Deanna, that was a fantastic picture of you, by the way. Beyond the classroom, Deanna has been a strong advocate for both teachers and students, serving as a union representative at the building and state levels, and even as a national delegate. Most recently, she contributed to the 2024 School Behavior and Climate Committee, offering public comment, insight, and outreach on the growing challenges inside of our schools. We're honored to have Deanna's perspective tonight, and I'm very excited to have this conversation with her so she can enlighten us in what she was seeing.
Hi there, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to participate and share stories that I'm sure so many people in the background of education are jumping up and down and saying, yes, share my story. I feel like I'm finally retired and it doesn't matter. I can share many thoughts.
Freedom.
Yes. So, and by the way, I highly recommend the retirement aspect.
Yeah. Deanna, can you start with us? Tell us about that hesitation. Where does that come from? And who is why is the hesitation there, and what is the hesitation about? Now, I can tell you in my industry what it would be, but tell us a little bit about maybe individuals that aren't in the teaching profession.
Well, being a professional, you don't want to be foreseen as gossiping, but there's also privacy issues similar to what you would experience in like HIPAA. There is a fear of retaliation. Depending on administrators. So there's different parts of that. And also more recently, there was a lot of uproar when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and then people started sharing thoughts on social media. We were even told at one point when social media first started coming out, but be careful about things that you post, even if you're on vacation and you're holding a drink. That could be seen as, you could have consequences for that. So that's basically where I think a lot of educators are coming from.
Yeah.
That makes sense. It's hard. It's hard for us as non-educators to wrap our head around it, because as far as I'm concerned, I feel so badly about the teachers that reach out and say that I can't say anything. Like, thank you for speaking out. If you could share this story, it would be great, because I can't personally say anything. And I imagine it has to be so hard to be in an environment day in and day out where you're experiencing these things that severely impact your day-to-day life, and not just your day-to-day life, but your perspective. And then you also can't talk about them.
Correct. Not into the degree you would like to. Yeah. Even when an incident occurs and you have to share the incident with like a victim's family, you're pretty much restricted from sharing the other person's name or the other students' names involved. You have to let their student share the name. So there's a lot of restrictions and feeling like your hands are tied in many situations.
Yes.
Now I know that. Sorry, Katie.
No, you're good. You're good.
I'm just. I know that there was a survey done by the DSEA that said 1 in 5, and it was taken by teachers, and there was 1 in 5 teachers said that they had been physically assaulted by students. And I found that first of all, I found that very interesting, because that was not the culture that was in the classroom, at least where I was when I was in public high school down here in Milford. But then as I talked more and more teachers, even teachers that said I wouldn't have said that I was, on a public survey that I was physically assaulted. I have definitely been physically assaulted. So what has been your experiences with inside the classroom, and are there What can you say about that?
So, what I can share with you, and as Katie shared, I've had a lot of experience being a building rep for the union, and just like an advocate, because that was my whole purpose of my career, to advocate
Wonderful.
for educators and our students. That was my purpose, and I think you could talk to thousands of teachers that can share that they've been injured in some way, whether on purpose or not on purpose. We even had a teacher at one point who became disabled from a student injuring her, and she had to quit as a result of that. She's just disabled, and there's very little consequences and accountability on the side of students, but as well as families. There's daily, and even worse than the physical, there's daily verbal assaults, because that's what they are. And it's just becoming part of the common daily culture with the trauma. People talk about trauma that happens at home, but there's daily trauma happening at school, around the classroom. And I can share a personal story of a student that my classroom experienced, probably weekly, if not daily, at some point, interruptions. And this is a student who was not even in my grade. He was in the hallway. So you've got kids that aren't even in your classroom. And this student had come into the classroom, and he would open doors. He would just interrupt and talk. He would come up to the board and start pushing buttons. And this child had what's called a one-on-one paraprofessional that was following him because of his behaviors. But then again, that's pretty much what they do, the paraprofessionals. And I think, if you ask, how did we get here? Because I think that's what a lot of people are wondering. So yes, the root cause is the lack of accountability for the students and their families for the behaviors. It's been happening incremental over time. And this is from preschool, kindergarten on up. So it's not just a high school, middle school problem, although we heard from the resource officer that a lot of that social media happens more at the middle and high school level versus the elementary level. But you still have equally as disturbing behaviors. I can tell you there was a report of a kindergartner that was made, not one, but multiple instances of overtly sexual behavior and assaulting. And they had to have an unofficial one-on-one staff member follow this child around so he wouldn't do anything to other students. It's just crazy. But when you think about it, we've had a disintegrating, nuclear, stable family, sense of entitlements from students, and as your other speakers shared, a loss of values and respect for authority and education. At one point, if you look at Delaware laws, we had federal and state laws that talked about accommodating like least restrictive environment and FAPE and Students with Disabilities Act. So what happened at some point, if you look at the Delaware history, we had a place to put students that with severe mental disabilities, and they at some point in the early 2000s started moving them to the general population without the training resources, and that was a disaster, as you can imagine. I can tell you one staff member, when the year this first rolled out in our school, was dressed every day for work like she was going to a nuclear meltdown because of one student and she only had one student who would hit kick, spit, bite. That's just it just shouldn't be acceptable. And I don't care what the disability is. I feel like we've made so many excuses, and you hear COVID, COVID, COVID. Yeah, COVID is part of it, but I think it has revealed what's been happening incrementally. Also, we've had more demands placed on not just the educators, but also the students. And that's created some, it's created a lot of anxiety with students and mental instability, this sense of failure and lack of success. So throwing more money at the problem is not the answer. And throwing a new curriculum is not the answer. When you look at older generations, they learned how to read with a simple Dick and Jane and Dr. Seuss. So it's the KISS. Keep it simple. The KISS method. And we and as you mentioned before, my bio, I had tried to participate in that school behavior and climate committee. I had an extensive conversation with Representative Brian Townsend, but I feel like everything that my colleagues and I put forth, and I had sent you the whole documentation that we worked on, and that was all volunteer. It was all in our time, a 17-page document with an impact statement, problem, solution, and the research behind it. I feel that the majority of that fell on deaf ears, unfortunately.
Deanna, I'm going to make that document, if it's okay with you, available for people to check out and see the work that you've done. But as you're telling me about these stories, and I'm really having a hard time getting past that kindergarten story. You know, when I talk about these things on social media, there's always almost a constant battle between it's the school's fault and it's the parents' fault. And the parents want to say, no, it's the schools, and the schools want to say, no, it's the parents. But let's be so honest and so for real. There's equal blame to be paid, because a kindergartner doesn't enter a school just organically knowing something is going on in the home front for that kindergartner to know about that at 5, 6 years old, and B, to think that that's okay at 5, 6 years old. And it also lies on the schools, because there's not anything being done. I find that the protocols are not being followed for these districts that discipline these children accordingly. And I understand that obviously kids that have 504 plans and IEPs, like there's different needs that they have. But at the same time, when it comes to certain behavior, such as you mentioned, it's not fair to expose other students and risk them just to kind of curtail to what this student needs.
Yes. I totally agree. Yeah, feel free. I'm more than happy to share anything that we have uncovered. And if you think about it too, it's not just in the schools. You know, if you look on the news, there was all this civil unrest in DC and big cities. And then you'll see a lot of these teens that get arrested. And the sad truth is these teens know that they're underage. They're going to be a revolving door, and there's no consequences. So there's a pattern and a common theme of no consequences. And one of the solutions that I had proposed in that document was, if a child gets suspended or does an offense of a severe nature or repeated offense, then we should have set up supports in place so that the child needs to get either some kind of mental health support, outside, and or parents need parenting classes, or families, because we have that nuclear family has broken down. That's sort of the minority. And I think that it's a trickle down effect. One thing has impacted the other.
Another thing that stood out to me that you had mentioned was how the older generations learned with Dick and Jane. They learned the old school methods. It's not the curriculum that's the issue. I'm wondering, have you seen, or do you believe there's any correlation negatively with this implementation of tablets and computers and Chromebooks in every classroom as young as preschool and kindergarten?
Yes. Yes. And there are studies that will say that it is detrimental to children.
Mhm.
Well, think about it, and it's detrimental to us. We're replacing human interaction
Mhm.
and problem solving with sticking a device in their face.
Yeah.
And I know there was an experience that you had shared before on your platform about another child in Colonial District, and
Yes.
it starts with "my precious child," thinking you don't have the support. Well, do you wonder how much screen time that they had? The kid gets home and they're handed a phone, a tablet, a computer, or a game, and something. The human interaction is becoming a lost art.
It actually, there's been studies that have been done, and when I go into my talks about this, because I could be here all night, I could talk to you about the difference in food that kids are eating now and the lack of nutrition that they're eating. There's so many factors that play into it. But when we're specifically talking about screens, there is a chemically the brain chemically changes the more
Yes.
screen time you have. And as an adult as well. But when you're a child and your brain is developing and your brain is like this sponge, the dopamine receptors that are going haywire through these shows that kids are watching, that permanently and alterly, it changes them. It changes their ability to function. It changes their ability to concentrate. And that's not to say that there's not, in a lot of instances, some instances, an actual condition present. But when kids are on screen before they're gone to school and they're getting constantly overloaded with dopamine and dopamine and dopamine and enjoying what they're watching, it's no wonder why when they get in a classroom setting with a book, if there's a book ever in a classroom setting anymore, they can't concentrate.
That is correct. You could juggle standing on your head and spit fireballs out your behind, and you're not going to hold their attention.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good image to to end on. No, Deanna, thank you so much for
Yes.
bringing a perspective of a teacher to light.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Dan.
I just wanted to add, so some people wonder, well, what can I do and become more aware as parents?
Please.
So, some tips that I just wrote down is, obviously get involved with the PTO and school board meetings and be vocal and speak out. Learn as much as you can. And if the more you're around the school, the more you'll see what goes on, even if you're, just ears. And then ask teachers specific questions and direct questions like, how many disturbances in class are there a day or a week? How many are physical? How many are with obscene and vulgar language? How many are verbal assaults? How many times have you needed assistance from administration or school personnel like the counselor to assist to remove a child from class? Have you found that incidents have been handled consistently across the board with all students, whether they're with or without disabilities? How many students in class have been interrupted by the lesson? Do you see a pattern? Are there effective steps taking place to address these? Are there any students from other classes that interfered with instruction, and how frequently? So those are just some, rapid fire questions that might give people more insight.
Absolutely. Thank you. Where I see a lot of change also going on in schools is when families become the light themselves. So I see a lot of families will, for lack of a better term, adopt another child who maybe has a background that doesn't have those values or doesn't come from a background where they are, where they have a stable background, and it's somebody that plays on the same soccer team as them or is in the theater club with them. And they, in a sense, kind of adopt that kid into their family and show them what the values are like and invite them to different things. And so anyone that's watching, and I want to encourage them, if they know somebody, a friend of their children that they know are in that situation. I want to encourage them to be the light for that child, and kind of have them as a person that you invite into your family, and show them, and invite them to dinner, and invite them out to go places with you, and show them how your family interacts, show them the values that you have, and be that light for them as well, if you can see that their family is struggling.
Yes, all very good. Thank you for doing this important topic.
Well, thank you.
Us, and I will be sure to share that Google Drive for the commenters that are asking about where they can find it. I'll share it right there on my profile this evening after we conclude this. Thank you for the tidbits on especially the school board meetings, because somebody that has been very involved with watching these school board meetings, even as a homeschool parent, my tax dollars are going here. I care about the product that we're getting for our money. And not enough people are attending these meetings, which could very much be the root of the problem. But Deanna, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight and share your perspective from inside of the classroom. And with that, I cannot think of a better segue. We have talked about what it's like being in the halls with the SRO, what it's like with being a school counselor that is dealing with these kids one-on-one. And we talked about what it's like being in the classroom, but we have not heard yet what it's like on the home front for somebody who has experienced school violence for their child. So with that, we would like to welcome Angie Cunningham to the conversation tonight. And Angie, I had written up an intro, but honestly, I would prefer you sharing what you experienced, because nobody's going to say it better than a mom who had to go through this.
Okay, thank you. So my daughter was in 8th grade at Laurel Middle School, and there had been 2 students that had been bullying her for a couple of years, actually. And I had been going back and forth with the school, the administration, about these 2 girls. There had been physical altercations prior to what led up to what happened in 8th grade. So my daughter had an IEP, and in the IEP there were actual safety guards that if these 2 girls approached her, bullied her, what my daughter was to do. So one day my daughter's in the lunchroom with her friend at the lunch table. These 2 girls walk by, tell my daughter they're going to beat her up. My daughter follows her safeguard, goes and tells an adult in the lunchroom. They make her return to the lunch table. The girls come back by again. My daughter and her friend go to another adult. They separate my daughter and her friend, make my daughter return to one table, the friend to another. Within 2 minutes, these 2 girls jumped my daughter. They were much larger than her. They repeatedly kicked her in the head, and it resulted in her having a traumatic brain injury. The school did not call me and tell me that this had happened. I was called by another student's mother. The student had witnessed it, called her mom. So I'm calling the school, and they're like, yes, your daughter's in the office. There was a little bit of an altercation. I go there. My daughter can barely move her head. Her eyes are heavy. I could tell something's wrong. She had not even been evaluated by the nurse. So I take her to the doctor. They thought that she had a fractured neck due to her injury. We go to the ER. She had a sprained neck and a concussion. We end up in the concussion clinic at AI DuPont. So long story short, these girls had been repeat offenders, not only towards my daughter, but towards other students. And so I started speaking out at school board meetings. And in March of 2023, I spoke out at a school board meeting. And because the superintendent and the board members did not like a quote that I had in my speech, they verbally attacked me. The superintendent tried to intimidate me and bully me, but I was not backing down. I stood my ground with him, and I had no idea, but by the next day, my phone had so many messages from other parents, staff members, previous staff members, about what had been happening in the school, the violence, and how they were afraid to speak out because of retaliation, because it's like the good old boys club. They all support and protect the superintendent there. So no matter how much you speak out, Nothing's changed. The board members try to silence you. So I just kept going to meeting after meeting to speak out. They would try to use their policy that we could not speak out against leadership. And if we did, our speeches would be cut short. I would remind them it was a public forum. Therefore, First Amendment rights are protected, and I would continue to speak. So they tried other avenues to silence me. They would have staff members. One was a male custodian who had no student or no kids in the school speak. And the information that he was speaking about was information about me and my daughter that he would not have known had he not been provided that information. And I know they were doing that to try to once again intimidate me or silence me. So I had several, teachers reach out saying that they're witnessing the violence in the classrooms, but they were afraid to report it because if you have so many referrals, it can reflect on you getting a raise. It can reflect, on the teacher not doing her job. So they had to really pick and choose what altercations they wanted to report because all this then goes to the state. So since then, it's just been a constant battle. I would have staff members attack me on social media for speaking out for the students. And like I said, the school would try to silence me. And, my daughter, she's now in 12th grade and she is homebound. She cannot return to the school. Those two students that attacked her, they were allowed to go back to the school. They got charged. However, the charges were just a slap on the wrist, a little bit of community service. That was their only consequences.
I'm almost speechless. I'm so sorry you experienced that. I cannot imagine the state of a mother walking in and seeing their daughter in that situation. Now, at some point after repeatedly, and I commend you for this, going to these school board meetings and just doing what you had to do for your daughter, what services were in the long run offered to your daughter? What did they do to make the situation for your daughter a little bit better so she could still at least attend school with everything she had endured?
So my daughter was not able to go back in person to school. So she needed to be homebound. So we were school choice at that time because she had attended Laurel from kindergarten to 8th grade. Because of my work schedule, that's where I would have someone get her on the bus and off the bus. But after all that, I took her out of the district, enrolled her in our home district, and she's been homebound ever since. So we have a teacher that comes here. Now with the school district that she was in, we did have a lawsuit for IEP comp funds. The school refused to settle in the 2-year statute limitation that they have. We ended up having to go to federal court. We did mediation in federal court. That was May 2024. We settled. We actually signed the paperwork September 2024. The funds were not made available to us until the end of June of this year. And with comp ed funds, there is a limit on how much time you have to use them. So whatever is not used by the time my daughter turns 22 returns to the school district. And anything that you want, because it's held in a trust, you have to request it. And they have the right to approve it or refuse it. Quite a few things that we have requested, they have refused. And once again, we've had all these years wasted where we could use those funds for extra tutoring for my daughter. So now we're in 12th grade. And part of the trust is we have to have a certified teacher tutor her. Well, there's a teacher shortage in Delaware. The school district can have paras teach a whole classroom. But if I want my daughter to have extra tutoring and the trust pay for it, it has to be a certified teacher. If we use the funds to get my daughter a laptop to have at home, she's allowed one electronic device every 18 months. In 18 months, I had to turn the laptop into the school district that was purchased with her funds if we want to get another one. So there's so many things that are written in these trusts that these educational lawyers do because they're protecting the district because they make it impossible for parents to use these funds for the children. They've already failed them in the school. And now we're trying to get these funds so we can give them an education in the setting that is more appropriate for them. And these lawyers are writing the trust in a way that we cannot utilize them for the children. Therefore, the money will return to the school district.
It feels like a major flaw in the system to have the same people that are having to pay for these services also be responsible for approving or denying them.
Exactly. Yes. So that is where I am battling. I have, and I'm not only doing this for my daughter, I'm doing this for other students because the incident you talked about earlier with the student that had a knife, that was at the same school my daughter was attacked at. And, I have brought many things to the table for the board, see clear through book bags, the metal detectors. Let's not have cell phones in the classrooms. But while you're there and you're talking, the board members are talking amongst themselves. They're writing notes. They're passing notes. They're not paying any attention to parents whatsoever. So, and some of the teachers had said that they had issues with administration. They went to the board members. Nothing was done. So they went to the Department of Education, who tells them, this is not our problem. You have to go back to the board. So it's just a continuous cycle of you're going all these routes to try to find help, but there is no help. Like I've myself have contacted the Department of Education, the governor's office, the Secretary of Education, and I was told by the Secretary of Education's office, this is not anything that we deal with. Well, I'm sorry, what do you deal with? This is a big system failure all the way around. First, the bullying that was allowed to go on. My daughter's IEP ignored. My daughter assaulted with a permanent injury. The students allowed back at the school to continue to harass and bully other students. And then, taking all this time to get the comp funds for my daughter and now getting everything refused that could help my daughter. So all of this is a big failure. So where does the Secretary of Education come in? Where does the Department of Education come in? Where are the help that the parents need? Because we're not getting it from the board members. So
Yeah,
where else is there to go?
Where does the help come from? Who does come in? If this person isn't responsible and this person is responsible, who is responsible? Who can help when situations like this occur? And your situation, it does not seem like a one-off situation at all, because as I'm reading comments while you're speaking, people are thanking you for being on and saying this is the closest story to being correct that we've heard all night, because so many people have experienced this same tale that you are going through.
Yes.
So it's, excuse me for interrupting, but it seems to be even, first of all, Angie, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing the story. I know it must be difficult, but sharing the details of what really got me was you sharing the detail of you walking into the office and seeing your daughter in the condition she was. That really got me, because I pictured myself walking into the office and seeing my own daughter sitting there. But I also thank you for sharing those details, because that is what makes people realize that this is real and this is happening and this is a child that needs to be protected. So thank you so much for doing that. I think this speaks deeper to a problem that we have in the state of Delaware, even deeper to there is such a rush for rehabilitation of the people who perpetrated the crime. And rehabilitation is great, but they don't take the steps to say, number one, how can we help the victim? The victim needs to be number one. And how do we wrap around services for the victim? Because the victim did not ask for this. The victim did not say one day, I want somebody to do this to me. But yet the people who perpetrated that did. They made the decision to do that. So we need to first and foremost help the victim. And then there also needs to be consequences, real consequences, because this wasn't just, something happened to your daughter and she was able to come back the next day or the next week. she is homebound, and she will, no matter how much she progresses, she will deal with that trauma for the rest of her life. And there needs to be real life consequences to show them that there will be real life consequences in life when things like this happen as well.
Yes, the assault was recorded,
Hmm.
and even after the girls were charged, they would circulate this video continuously.
Mm.
And it was to the point where my daughter attempted suicide, because, she had to keep witnessing this because multiple people would just keep sending it to her over and over. Um, so to watch your daughter go from this fun-loving, bubbly
Mm.
child to someone, we would spend many nights sitting in her room, and she would say, "Mom, I just want to feel happy again. I just want to feel joy." She's like, "I just pray every night. I want to feel happiness." And, she's in 12th grade. She's missed proms. She's missed
Mm.
homecomings. She hasn't got to enjoy all those things, and you can't get all that back. And, to be treated like that at the school when I spoke with emotion about what she was going through, the simple fact that I quoted President Trump is the only thing that got a reaction from the superintendent and the board members. And they nicknamed me the apprentice mom. They didn't react to what happened to my daughter and
Mm.
what she had to go through. It was because they did not like a quote I made. It wasn't political. It was a quote that I felt was very important, but that was the only response I got. And after that is when they tried to target me. The superintendent lied and tried to tell people that my daughter was injured off of school grounds at a bowling alley. That
Mm.
was not true. Um, so I had people reaching out to me saying, "What can we do? Because we're having this happen with our students in the school, but we're afraid if we speak out because we see what you go through at the meetings. We see how they are coming at you, retaliating. What can we do?" And I would try to get them and say, "We need to get together at these board meetings and speak together, a group of us. It takes more than just one voice." But people just don't want to do that because of fear of retaliation and what can happen.
Absolutely. There needs to be a push from more people, and I'm hoping that with your help and for the help from people who are listening tonight, that we can make that push a reality, that we can stand up for victims inside of our schools, victims throughout our community, and say we've had enough. This is a real story where the thing that breaks my heart the most is what you just said about you had a happy daughter and you experienced her going to someone who tried to commit suicide and going through that pattern, starting from a happy girl that, again, did not ask for any of this to happen. And
Right.
that's where accountability and transparency need to come in. And I know we've been, I appreciate you talking with me the other day over coffee. I think the conversation is where it starts, but action needs to take place. And this is not, unfortunately, this is not just a one-off. It's happening all over the state, and we need to get behind you and others and say it's time that it stops. It's time that it stops in our schools. Parents start showing up and saying it's time, and then getting on to administrators, legislators, the governor, and say, I don't care whose position it is to make this happen. Get together and make it happen. It doesn't matter
Right.
who has to sign that bottom line. Get together and make it happen, because this is where we need to go.
And that's my fear. I know that they are going to dismantle the Department of Education and return it back to the states. Well, when you're in a state like Delaware, that really isn't going to do any good.
Mm.
And there's a lot of talk right now that that's the plan, because the Department of Education really has not done anything. When they were founded in 1980, 20,000 students were homeschooled. As of today, over 4 million children are homeschooled.
Wow.
So really, what has the Department of Education done? But once again, if the government ends up turning it back over to the states, and you're in a state like Delaware, we have nowhere to go. Like, we have nowhere to oversee all the corruption and the school level, the corruption of the lawyers that are writing these trust funds. and backing these schools so that ultimately the schools are getting the money back and parents and students are not getting what they need. It's one big corrupt, failed system.
Mm. Angie, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your courage, for sharing your story with us and also with our audience tonight. I look forward to talking. I know Katie does as well. I look forward to talking with you in the future and continuing the progress on this to help your daughter and your family and the others that have been victims of violence in our public schools. So thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
tonight and speaking with us.
Absolutely. And
Thank you.
Angie, we're going to see if we can find some resources to connect you with as well. And if not some resources, maybe just somebody within the state that's willing to listen to your story, because it's abhorrent that out of all the outlets you went to, nobody was willing to help and very few were willing to even listen.
Right. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So our final guest tonight, we are going to bring on board. I think it's a perfect segue to see when a school is dealing with discipline and violence and is in the throes of trying to understand how they can support their teachers, how they can support their students. What are some things that actually can be done? So we're going to bring on a gentleman who's on the school board at the Milford School District. His name is Matt Booker. He is the vice. Give me 1 second. He is the vice president of the Milford School Board. He's also the legislative chairman of the Delaware School Board Association and the founder of the Buccaneer Education Foundation. He's a long-time community volunteer. And Matt, thank you so much for coming on board today to talk about some of the discipline issues that the Milford School Board and hearing from teachers and what you all were able to do by listening to the folks on the ground.
Brian and Katie, thanks very much for having me on. These are some remarkable guests. I feel a little small next to some of the talent you've had tonight. It's very nice to see Officer Melvin again. He was one of our great SROs in Milford. I would like to say something about public comment during school board meetings. So I did watch the video of Miss Cunningham's public comment. It's about 3 or 4 years old now. So in Milford, and this is compliant with Delaware Code and best practices, and of course our board policy. When a community member makes a public comment, the board listens. We do not interact. We do not speak up. We certainly don't browbeat the commenter. That's just totally out of bounds. And not only that, the reason for that is we have to maintain some sort of consistency. So to give you a hypothetical, you've got a parent that comes up and says, Coach Smith is awesome and spends his 3 minutes or his 5 minutes telling how great Coach Smith is. And we allow that. And then you've got another parent, community member comes up and says, Coach Smith is awful, and let me explain to you why. And you stop him. Well, you see that's totally out of bounds, and it wouldn't stand up if that second parent were to make some sort of legal case out of it. Mm-hmm. So we always let the community members say their piece, and we move on. And also regarding safety and security. When I was elected, in 22, the planks on my platform was definitely safety and security. And I promised that I would work toward having an SRO or a constable or a combination thereof in every one of our buildings. And we were able to accomplish that within the 16 months or so after I was elected. So the SRO or the constable, we have found that sometimes and quite often they're the most trusted individual in the school for a large segment of the student population that don't feel they can talk to the teachers or their frontline administrators or even counselors. But these security personnel, they develop relationships with these kids, and a lot of times they're troubled kids, and a lot of times they're male, and they respect and most of our constables, although not all. Certainly, one of our great SROs is a female member of Milford PD and highly respected. But they develop a sort of man-to-man or brotherly relationship with them, and they're able to help them through some of the things and keep them out of trouble, and keep them out of a situation where the police are going to have to be called, or there's going to have to be some sort of infraction recorded. So I'm certainly behind security personnel as a matter of course in all of our buildings, so much so that, as you well know, I come to you 3 years ago, and Brian, we worked together on a bill, and I'm hopeful that will pass at some point. It's been through 2 sessions now, but to have the state fund their share to fund SROs and constables just like they do teachers. If we agree that safety and security are paramount in our school buildings, and I think we do, then we ought to regard these personnel as essential, and therefore ought to be funded the same way teachers are. So that money is already being spent. Anything that the state would spend is already being spent by the local school districts. Every time that there's a safety and security referendum, from Lake Forest to Red Clay to any of these school districts, Brandywine, it always passes. The community wants safety and security, and they want these personnel in positions in our school buildings. So, hats off to you and Officer Melvin, and we'll see what happens in the next session.
Matt, if I can push a little bit, you had mentioned that this is something that people want. And I personally, when I first learned about this bill a while ago, I commended Brian on it. I think it's something so important. I personally come from a law enforcement family, and I think they truly can, especially in our schools, make all the difference. But when we first talked about this, probably about a month ago, Brian and I was very shocked to hear a lot of the public up here in Newcastle County's push back against this. There are a lot of people that do not want SROs in school, which I personally do not understand, but I think it's a culture thing, and I think it's a societal issue where they're afraid that without SRO being in school, that their kids become, I believe the term is school to prison pipeline. But doesn't that also relate back to, if you're fearful of a SRO being in the school because of what may happen to your child probably isn't doing the right things in school?
That's not an unreasonable hypothesis. So as far as the piece of legislation itself, I was in the education committee when it was debated and argued, and I learned something about the General Assembly I could have learned in no other way. And the phrase "school to prison pipeline" was bandied about by some of your Newcastle County representatives.
Oh, yeah.
There was a minor objection to spending the money, but then again, they'll spend multiple, tens of millions of dollars on things that have really no effect or negligible effect, but it's a really cost shifting. It's not really spending any more money, but won't finance things that we do know have a negligible effect on safety, security, morale, and teacher contentment and teachers' feelings of being safe in the buildings. We want our every staff, students, everybody to feel safe in our buildings. We want them to be safe in our buildings, and nothing can happen without, no education can happen without, first, safety, second, order, and then we can have an environment that's conducive to learning.
Yeah.
So Matt, tell me a little bit about how you and your colleagues in Milford were able to help support the teachers themselves when they, um, as we discussed, this number of the statistic of 1 in 5 teachers
Right.
being assaulted or not feeling comfortable in the environment that they are.
Right.
How were you and your colleagues on the school board able to help with that environment in Milford?
So right off the bat, when I got there, the administration wanted to introduce restorative practices or restorative practice statement in the code of conduct. Now, restorative practices by in and of itself is a neutral thing. If it's applied correctly, it can have a good effect, but it is not a replacement for consequences or discipline or application of the code. So the next year we had kind of like half the board left, and we're out, and half were elected, and the folks that were elected kind of felt the same way I did. So we stripped it from the code of conduct. So there's no mention of restorative practices in the code of conduct. The 19 public school districts, and of course the charters, they all have a code of conduct that's pretty much the same, and with some relatively minor differences. But the real crux is, do you enforce it? How do you enforce it? And are you afraid to enforce it? So this gets us into some legislation here. So back in 2017, a piece of legislation was passed in the Senate, SB 85, and it was spawned by a dear colleague letter from nearly 10 years before to the Federal Department of Education by President Obama's Department of Education. So 2017, SB 85. What it basically, I forget what the nomenclature for the name of the bill was, but basically what it said was that you got a 3-year lead up, a curve, but at the end of 3 years, if your most suspended cohort, minority cohort, any kind of racial, gender, etc., was suspended more than 10% more than your least suspended cohort, then you were subject to a takeover of your discipline policy. You got your building got on an improvement plan, and there was a whole host of reporting requirements and oversight. So so Asian females commit practically zero infractions, statistical zero. So if you've got any other chopped up minority cohort that's 10% suspended more than Asian girls, then all of a sudden you've got a problem. So what does that lead these public school districts to do? I believe, and with good reason, and there's plenty of evidence out there, anecdotally and otherwise, that many of the school districts were simply under reporting, not providing a referral when one was warranted. There's steps in all the codes of conduct. The first time you might get a warning, the second time your parents might be called, and you've got some kind of write-up, all the way into the big boys like ISS and out of school suspension. All right, but if you never get them there by not reporting certain infractions, then you're kind of reverse padding the numbers where you don't trip the SB 85 guardrails. Okay, so, and I can't say for certain whether that was happening in Milford School District. Some people said it was, but irregardless, I recognize, and others recognize, that the potential was there for that to happen. So what we said as a board was, we don't care if we're on an improvement plan or not. If we have buildings that go under an improvement plan, we will do the due diligence, but the code of conduct will be enforced. If there's restorative practices, consequences, or any kind of counseling regime that to go along with that, there should be, but that does not alleviate the behavior from triggering the code of conduct. So we got a massive jump in referrals. We got a massive jump in in infractions being reported, but it started to go down. It took a couple of years, but it started to go down again because the code of conduct was being enforced consistently. I know some of the bus contractors would say, I hand my referrals to the person that's bus infractions, and I know they don't do anything with them. Well, we stopped that. We stopped, any kind of underreporting. So, improvement plans. So you've got districts that got 8 or 9 schools upstate on an improvement plan. We have 2. Very few schools have 0. Districts have 0 schools, but it's as long as you're enforcing the policy, you're not really punishing the person, you're punishing the infraction or correcting the infraction. I don't see where there's any kind of conflict, no matter who the person is. It's not about who you are, it's what you do. That is how you enter the code of conduct, and that's how you get, maybe there's some corrective action that goes along with restorative practices to get you back on track. And we see a lot of that. We see a lot of students that they go down the wrong track for a bit, but once they find out that there's consequences, then they come back to the fold. It's a very small percentage of students that do and maybe 2 to 4% that have most of the medium to serious infractions in any building, anywhere in the state. So we're not triaging anything, but we're saying we're going to enforce the code. We're going to hold these individuals accountable. We're going to get them back on track where we can. Another piece of and it's not in the legislation, or it may have been, it's been in the code for years, out of school expulsions. You cannot expel a child in the state of Delaware, or it's very, very difficult. It's huge hurdles to cross for more than 180 days. So when there's a serious infraction, and this is the law, there's nothing any public school district can do about it. When you've got an infraction that's so serious that it spawns them being expelled or sent to an alternative school, the one in the Kent side of Milford, they go to Parkway, it's in Capital School District, and the Sussex side, if the student resides in Sussex, they go to Scope. Okay, so we can only send them there for 180 days, and then they have to come back. So when we have a parent that says, well, my kid was assaulted by this other kid, but yet 18 months later, the kid's back in school, that's not something that's our choice. That's just the way the Delaware Code is written. So that's probably an explanation to some incidents that some parents were having.
If I can ask the question really quick, would that also include, let's say a child brings a gun to school and threatens somebody on school campus with that gun physically present? Can you also not give an expulsion to that child for more than 180 days, even in that situation?
So what would probably happen in that case, first of all, the Firearm Safety Act in Delaware, it's a mandatory 180 days if you're caught with a weapon of any kind on school property. That's mandatory. So you would go on. That's what you've done is committed a serious crime.
Yeah.
So you're probably not coming back to our school district. You're going to be sent to. That's the guardrail has been tripped. That'll get you on what we call the Attorney General's report, and you'll be in the criminal justice system then, and it's a case by case. I would think that such a thing would be, it would be very difficult to get the kid back into the school in which he or she had an infraction of that kind of serious level.
Matt, what do you think can be done, in your opinion, policy wise, or to help administrators or help teachers in order to have their backs when infractions happen, when discipline issues happen, when violence happens in the classroom? Is there something that needs to change school by school? Is it at the state level? What are some of your thoughts on first actions that can be taken to make sure that accountability happens and it's taken seriously?
Okay. So there's probably multiple levels to that, but let's start with the building level, and the building level administration, the principal, the dean of discipline, what have you, and the frontline teacher. They have to enforce the codes of conduct, the discipline policies that their board, which is an arm of the community, I identify with and represent the community, and that's whose interests that I'm supposed to carry out. So when we make a policy, the employees of the district need to enforce it. That's number one. Moving on to district level, or perhaps even the Department of Education, or perhaps even the General Assembly. When you have again, that 2 to 4%, 5%, whatever it is, that is unwilling or unable for any reason, setting aside any kind of stuff that was before about what's going on in the home or what's not going on in the home. If you have children that will not behave appropriately in class, they need to be in an alternative school. And it's pretty revolutionary. Not a lot of board members and practically no anybody that's drawing a check from the state Department of Education is going to tell you what I just told you. But we need actually funding for alternative schools, more alternative schools, so they can get their legally mandated education in an environment where they can have structure and they can learn some of the social skills and some of the personal interaction skills and some of the life skills that they were not able to learn from the family. You know, my campaign slogan was, back in the day, parents are the first and final, I don't know what it was, they're the first and final authority on the health and safety and education of their child. Well, sometimes the school district has to be the parent of last resort. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. So we need to put these kids in an environment where they can learn the things that they need to learn. And mainstreaming is fine, but if you have that minority that needs help outside of the normal school system, then they should get it. So to give you a ready example, one that's not even, you've probably heard it before. You've got 22 kids in a classroom. You've got one kid you got 21 kids that want to learn. A reasonable expectation is they're going to learn, and they want to learn. They have parents that want them to learn. You've got one kid that will not behave appropriately, that spins out and causes a scene in the middle of the classroom. Okay, in this situation, they clear the classroom of the 21 kids and then send in the intervention team to calm down the kid that's causing the ruckus, and get him out of there. Now, what's happened to that hour of classroom instruction? It's dead. You can never get it back. So someday, some student somewhere is going to be enterprising enough to sue a local school district because they're denying him his right to education, because he can't get an education in the classroom where he has one of these one of his fellow students. I don't know if such a thing is possible, but philosophically, you're shortchanging the other 21 kids because of the one that could get the help he needs if he were in a different environment.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. Do you think that there's anything that you see that could change on the state level or that needs to be looked at the state level that could help with this? You know, we've talked about phone legislation, which I think is necessary, and I think that will help. But what about discipline and being able to back those teachers and back helping to guard that environment within the school?
So I'm a local control, local authority type of guy.
Hmm.
You mentioned earlier I was the legislative chairman for the DSBA, which is an organization for the school boards that its purpose is to affect legislation, and we're all about local authority and local control. So cell phones, absolutely should be no cell phones in classrooms. Milford has had that policy since 1994. It was called handheld, personal device or whatever. And it probably were stuff like Nintendo Game Boys or whatever they had back then. You couldn't have anything, no electronic devices out. But it was selectively enforced, or some teachers were not enforcing it. That's one of the things when we decided as a board and had the backing of the upper leadership, the administration, that we were going to enforce this on a classroom level. And I'm not saying it's 100%. I'm for anybody out there in my community that wants to comment. My teacher, doesn't do that. I know that there's always exceptions, but many of the teachers appreciated us actually saying no more. And if the parents gripe and complain, that's too bad. Rules are rules, and they're rules for everyone. So the teachers have actually, they've actually said, well, my classroom is more behaved. They're paying attention, and I'm getting some positive results on academic wise. So building level and district level is important. The General Assembly, I just mentioned the alternative schools. Mm-hmm. I don't think by any means the Delaware Public Schools, the school system is underfunded. That would, we both know the numbers there.
Yes.
But I do think that what needs to happen is some of the things that we're doing inside the building, the regular school building, needs to be done in an environment either separate from the school building or in a separate school or in a separate wing, or however it needs to be done. It needs to be restructured to be able to get this percentage that's causing the majority of the problems back where they can rejoin the mainstream student, having learned the life skills and the social interaction skills that they need. So that really probably does need to be championed by the General Assembly, because it would involve some capital construction, some other things. So that would be great. I mean, we would love that. We would also like to have funding flexibility. Mm-hmm. Between 1% and 5% of the average Delaware school district's budget is controlled, or is not already spent or earmarked for some kind of initiative or pet project from the legislature. We need the flexibility within each public school district, right down to the building, to do what we need to do for the population that we serve. To give you a ready example, allow me to be precise. We have a school in Milford that has majority minority, and we're talking Latino, and we're talking Haitian. We have Creole speakers. We have 114, 120 Creole speakers in one school. Mm-hmm. We need more ESL in that environment, but we need less administration in perhaps the district level or another environment. Well, because of the initiatives and the reporting requirements we have to do, and the units we get to accomplish them, we can't give the frontline classroom teacher, the building level, the things that they need for that school that another school, maybe in Cape Henlopen or in Dover, may not need. So those two items, those would have probably an immediate and beneficial effect on the public school system.
All right. Well, thank you, Matt, so much. I look forward to continue this talk with you, and hopefully to serve alongside you in the General Assembly as well. I think you have some great experience, but also some great ideas pushing forward. And thank you for everyone tonight that watched us. I think the last time, what did we say? We had over 10,000 people that watched our last show, and
A couple hundred downloads too, Brian. A couple hundred downloads.
oh my goodness. So we are excited to continue to bring this to you. Thank you to all the guests. We really had a great range of people to talk about the education here in Delaware, what's going on at the ground level. What we really hope that this sparks is not just these conversations here tonight and not just these daily videos that we're doing on reclaimed ground, but we want neighbors and people that you work with and people that you go to church with and people that your kids play soccer with them or whatever sport they play, to start talking about these things, because that's how we bring it to the forefront. That's how we create an environment where these things become important. There's so many things that have risen to the forefront of our culture and forefront of the General Assembly and forefront of people's minds that aren't really in the same scope of importance of our children and how they're going to be raised and what we're going to leave for the next generation. So let's keep talking about this. Reach out to people who wrote in the comments and ask them if you can sit down and coffee with them and ask them their perspective, even if it was different. Start having these conversations so we can start building these future moves. And Katie, I mean, what was your perception of tonight, and what can we see for the future here?
I mean, it's such an important topic, and we could have been here for way longer.
I know.
With different people with different perspectives. You mentioned the commenters. I have another screen for those of you guys who can't see, which is everybody. I have another screen right here where I'm reading the comments as they populate, and there's been great conversation in the comments tonight. In fact, some of the questions I directly asked our guests originated from the comment section. And I think one of the issues is, for where we are at in education, it has become such a taboo topic. Nobody wants to hurt anybody's feelings talking about this out in the open, out in the wild, as I would say, out in amongst each other, not behind a screen and behind a keyboard. Nobody wants to have these conversations. Nobody wants to talk about the behavior, because what if it's somebody you're talking to whose child causes this behavior? Nobody wants to have the conversations about protocols not being followed through, because what if you're talking to a teacher or an administrator who isn't following protocol, or a teacher that knows protocol isn't being followed because of the reasons that Matt just mentioned? So it's become such a taboo topic, and that's why it's gotten so far gone. Like most things that do become a taboo topic, it's important to have these conversations, and it's important to spark dialogue and conversation around solutions to these problems. I know we talk about cell phones in schools. That's obviously a problem, right? I graduated in 2005, and in 2005 we had cell phones, but it was not a problem ever. It's a cultural issue. And we can say that cell phones being in the classroom is a major problem and they shouldn't be there. Realistically, you're not getting rid of cell phones in the classroom. Realistically, no matter how many rules are made about it, no matter how many yonder pouches are purchased to lock up these phones in cases, the kids are breaking them open. The kids have multiple devices. The rules aren't being followed. Rules are meant for people that follow the rules. And the problem in schools are the rules aren't being followed. So there needs, even when we're saying things like this is a problem, that is a problem, there has to be more conversation about how to solve the problem and not just what the problems are.
Absolutely. And as we bring it back to Christ, as we always do, family is Christ-centered, and this is where we fight for our families, that they can have a safe environment, where they can have a place where they feel that desire of knowledge and they feel the opportunity of education that can help better prepare them for life and can put them on whatever track it is that God has for them, so that they can see what their highest purpose is and go for it. We are really excited to be here. We have some. Do you want to tease the upcoming episodes, or should I? Katie?
I do, but while you're talking about bringing it back to Christ and stuff, there's two scriptures I actually wrote down when we first started talking about this topic and we started putting this all together. One is Isaiah 54:13 says, all your children shall be taught by the Lord, and great shall be the peace of your children. And 1 Corinthians 14:33 reads that for God is not a God of disorder, but of peace. It is important not just to education, but to spirit and soul to fix the problem in our schools.
Thank you so much. Oh my goodness. Thank you. So I know you like the teasers. This is like what you do the best. So do you have in front of you the next three that we're
I
gonna
don't, but you know what? I don't think I need anything in front of me to go over. The next one we're going to be talking about, guys, there's a really important topic coming up, especially if you are one of our followers and viewers in the Newcastle County school districts. This is huge. This is major. The Reading Consortium. So the vote for the Reading Consortium, and if you're unfamiliar with this is basically redistricting. They want to take 4 different school districts, that being Brandywine, Colonial, Red Clay, and Christina, and combine them and redistrict the people. The reason being is debatable, whether it's the reason on paper or other reasons in optics, but they want to redistrict and send kids to different schools. The problem is this is going to have a disproportionate impact on 2 school districts, particular, that being Brandywine School District and the Red Clay School District. Things are not being talked about enough when it comes to it. I talk to people every day. They have no idea this is even happening, and they have kids in these school districts. So we are going to do an episode on December 3rd, speaking about these problems within the redistricting process and the impact that the redistricting will have on these school districts. It looks like, I'm not 100% sure, but the chatter is that it appears that no matter which way it shakes out and what decisions are made, it's going to end up being combined down to 2 school districts. So I'm going to dig more into that this upcoming week to get some information on that. I have invited guests on that are on the parents' end that have been researching this and following this entire process. And we have invited somebody from the Reading Consortium that itself to come on and talk about it too. I have not heard back yet, but I'm hopeful that we will soon.
Wonderful. We're also going to be leaning in and talking about addiction across the first state, what's going on with the opioid settlement fund, the $250 million that have been given to the state of Delaware, about the funds that have been frozen by mismanagement by the nonprofits who have taken them, and what are some great nonprofits that actually have stepped up and saved people's lives. We're going to bring people on who have actually turned their lives around from addiction, and talk about what led them in order to make that amazing change to find their higher calling. And that should be a really great episode. That will be the following week as well.
And the 3rd week, which will be the week after that, I'm going to be up to my shenanigans because Brian's traveling, so there's nobody to oversee me. And I'm going to bring our producer from behind the scenes in front of the camera. And we think that we might be able to get Mr. Rick Jensen in here as well. You may know him from WDEL, but that should be a fun episode. Brian, you got to trust me on that one.
Oh, I feel better if Rick will be here as well.
It'll be fun, guys. If no other time, you have to be here that week.
You've got to be here this week, and you've got to pull some buttons. So when I come back, I hear about it. And
I can do that. I can do that.
Oh my goodness. Well, we are so excited. We're Claim Ground Media again. We don't do this enough, but we've got to selfishly plug that this is all sponsored by you. It is all committed to you. 10% of all the money that we raise goes back to Christ. It is 10% of our business is going back to the kingdom, and the other 90% is going to help run the daily videos. This weekly show is going to help mentor other people into content creation as well, including the younger generation. So you see that below, tinyurl.com/RGM support. We promise we'll get better at asking for money so we can continue to grow.
Yeah, I mean, if I can say, I personally, I know this is a part of the process, having a platform like this. I get so awkward doing it because I get online and get on the internet and talk to you guys all the time about how unaffordable life is. But the thing is, in order for us to have these conversations, to do these interviews with people and bring them on as guests to get this conversation going and the narrative out there, we do need insight some type of way. So we will never be taking money from anybody that has an agenda or a narrative to push. We are always going to be doing this for you. It's by you. And even if you just want to buy us a cup of coffee, for us to buy our potential guests a cup of coffee, that is very, very, we're grateful of it. And we're thankful for your donation to this process and this platform.
Yeah. Thank you all very much. Katie, you want to take it away?
See ya!
Reclaim ground media, we're taking back the sound, lifting up the truth until the walls come down. Voices for the kingdom, hope in every town. This is where the lost get found. On reclaim ground.